What if the faith we cherish turns to stone, and behind the cathedral's walls, someone's suffering goes unseen? Picture this. In a grand sanctuary, a priest robed in tradition denies a homeless man even a sip of water, invoking doctrine. Then a quiet stranger in jeans steps forward and, with one simple gesture, turns the very meaning of faith upside down. Wait for the moment when you learn the name behind that silent act and discover why kindness outshines every sermon. Tall columns of pale marble rise toward a vaulted ceiling. Their smooth surfaces cool to the touch and echoing every footstep with a hollow hush. In the shadow of a massive oak door, a solitary figure stands draped in threadbare cloth that has known colder nights than these gleaming halls. His coat, once dark but now weathered and streaked with the dust of many streets, hangs heavy against his thin frame. His boots are cracked at the toes, the leather peeling back to reveal the worn soles within. Clutched in his gloved hands is a folded newspaper, its pages yellowed and brittle, serving him as both blanket and mat on nights when stone is the only bed. High above, stained glass windows filter the afternoon sun into gentle pools of blue and violet. Each pane depicts ancient scenes of solace and grace, yet the colors fall upon silent, unadorned walls that offer no warmth to this tired soul. The light drips in slow arcs, illuminating fine dust motes, and for a moment the cathedral seems to breathe a quiet welcome. Yet at ground level, the cavernous space remains indifferent. The dark grout between the stonework appears to swallow sound, leaving only the faint hiss of incense smoke as it drifts toward the ceiling. Rows of pews stand in precise order, their hardwood polished but unyielding. Sets of ash-gray candles burn in neat clusters along the side aisles, their flames disciplined and unwavering. The scent of frankincense drifts lazily through the air, each breath drawn feeling heavy, as though the fragrance itself were a gentle soporific. A handful of late-arriving worshippers, bowed heads and measured footsteps, tiptoe past on their way to confession, lips moving in unseen prayer. Their garments whisper against marble, and their eyes, if they glance toward the door, betray a flicker of discomfort, as if guilt might be contagious. The homeless man lifts a rough hand to his forehead, tracing the raised line of a scar etched into his skin, the memory of pain more vivid than the hush around him. The scar is a testament to battles fought far beyond these echoing walls. Battles marked by fear and sacrifice and the taste of blood, none of which have earned him a place among these orderly ranks. He listens to the cathedral's rhythm, measured in candlelight and muffled devotion, and senses that every beat is foreign to his ragged heart. Passers-by drift at the threshold, a hurrying mother clutching shopping bags, a suited businessman glancing at his watch, a tourist pausing briefly to photograph the vaulted arches. None linger. Their interest in this place of worship is fleeting, confined to a moment's admiration of beauty before they turn back to their errands. In their swift exit lies an unspoken message. This grand sanctuary belongs to plans and schedules, to those with clear purpose and unblemished attire. A man with dirt beneath his nails and threads hanging loose has no role here. From somewhere in the nave comes the quiet murmur of a choir rehearsing, a single sustained note that swells and fades into silence. The man's shoulders tense, as though drawing that sound into himself, seeking comfort in its resonance. But the choir's harmony remains a distant promise. Unbroken glass and polished floors lie between his world and theirs. The scent of devotion hangs heavy, yet it cannot seep beyond the threshold of privilege. He adjusts the rolled newspaper beneath his arm and shifts his weight from foot to foot, sending a faint echo through the marble corridor. Behind him, the massive door stands unyielding, its iron studs glinting under torchlight. To step within would mean surrendering to unfamiliar rules, or worse, begging for mercy in a place built on sacred words rather than shared humanity. He hesitates, heart pounding as though summoned by the hush, torn between reverence for the space and dread of rejection. Outside, The distant rumble of traffic begins its steady pulse again, a reminder that life flows on beyond these sacred stones. The man breathes in the rich scent of polished wood and incense one last time. His gaze drifts to a small plaque mounted beside a side chapel. Words carved in gold leaf speaking of charity, compassion, and the promise of sanctuary for all who seek it. He lets the promise linger, heavy on his tongue, and then turns away. As he steps back into the fading light of the afternoon, the doorway behind him remains quiet, unchanged. Marble pillars stand guard over empty aisles, and the candles continue their unbroken burn. Somewhere beyond the stained glass glow, the choir holds its final sustained chord. Yet the memory of that hush follows him into the street, a palpable reminder of walls that shelter some while leaving others to linger in their cold and silent shadow. A tall figure in a flowing black cassock steps through the arched doorway, the heavy wooden portals groaning softly as they close behind him. His robe is immaculate, the fabric pressed to a sharp crease that contrasts starkly with the rumpled coat of the man who lingers in the shadowed threshold. A weighty cross of dark metal hangs at his chest, its surface worn smooth by centuries of devotional touch. Yet now it feels more like an emblem of authority than an instrument of solace. Under the deep hood, his face emerges only in hints. The set of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the slight tilt of his head as he surveys the petitioning figure at the door. There is no haste in his stride as he crosses the marble floor toward the porch where the air holds the mingled scent of cold stone and burning incense. Every step resonates through the nave, asserting his unspoken power over the hushed space. His gloved hand closes around a small prayer book, the pages edged in gold leaf, while the other hand lifts in a controlled gesture that speaks volumes. Without words, he conveys that this place of sanctuary is reserved for those deemed worthy, those who have fulfilled the unseen requirements for entry. The homeless man, clutching a folded rag of a newspaper, stands rooted in uncertainty as the priest's calm authority eclipses any hope for mercy. The gesture directed at him is subtle yet unmistakable, a gentle sweep of the priest's hand away from the threshold, as if shooing away a bothersome bird. The air trembles with the tension of unspoken rules, where faith is measured not by compassion, but by conformity to rigid standards. To step across the line would demand a sacrifice far beyond a stray coin or a whispered prayer. It would require admission of unworthiness and payment in kind. Behind the priest, rows of worshipers gather for confession, their shoes clicking against polished tile as they form a disciplined queue. Each person clasps a rosary or smooth prayer bead, murmuring under their breath as they wait for absolution. They shift sideways to avoid the pleading figure outside, stepping into the soft glow of candlelight that flickers across their bowed heads. The sanctuary's interior is a tapestry of grandeur, soaring vaults overhead, columns reaching toward painted frescoes of angels and martyrs, chandeliers dripping with crystal prisms that scatter light into gentle rainbows upon the floor. Yet beneath this splendor lies an unsettling calculus. The more magnificent the setting, the more carefully compassion must be rationed. The ornate altar promises salvation, but the path to grace here is paved with the assurance that mercy can be withheld. The homeless man's eyes sweep the scene. The perfect symmetry of wooden pews, the orderly clusters of votive candles, the polished brass lectern where a sermon of love and forgiveness will soon be delivered. He senses the contradiction between the church's message and the silence directed at his need. His scarred hand trembles as it retreats from the threshold, the folds of his coat whispering against the carved stone floor. The incense smoke curls upward in pale tendrils, weaving through the hushed columns, but never reaching him outside the sacred boundary. Each wisp that drifts past carries a reminder that this holiness is selective, that the promise of sanctuary exists only for those who fit within the cathedral's invisible parameters. Beyond the heavy doors, the bustle of the street resumes, passing cars, distant voices, the chatter of everyday life. But inside, the message is clear and chilling in its precision. True devotion is measured by adherence to doctrine rather than by acts of spontaneous charity. The ornate choir stalls and gilded iconography stand as mute witnesses to a ritual devoid of the warmth it proclaims. The church's walls, meant to shelter souls, instead cast a long, cold shadow over the one who will not cross its threshold. In this moment, faith is revealed not as a living force of compassion, but as a fortress of exclusion, leaving empty aisles and silent candles to testify that the greatest barrier to mercy may lie within the very doors that bear the promise of grace. At that precise moment, a figure emerged from the shadows of the cathedral's side aisles, moving with deliberate calm that contrasted sharply with the rigid formality of the priests and the tremulous hesitation of the homeless man at the threshold. He wore unremarkable jeans faded by countless washes and a soft, well-worn jacket that had clearly accompanied him through many seasons. There was no bulky backpack slung over his shoulder, no polished shoes tapping an expectant rhythm on the marble floor, only the quiet assurance of someone who had no need for grand entrances. As he stepped forward, the hushed murmur of candlelit devotion seemed to quiet further, drawing all eyes, however reluctantly, to his measured approach. The stranger paused beside the man in tattered boots, his gaze neither pitying nor condescending, but simply attentive. Without hesitation, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a plastic bottle of water, its label half peeled and the contents sloshing gently. In a single, fluid motion, he offered the water, tilting the bottle just enough to let a slow ribbon of clear liquid cascade into the worn hand of the homeless stranger. No words were spoken, none were needed. The simple act of sharing something so ordinary, so elemental, carried a weight that reverberated through the vaulted space. The distant flicker of chandeliers above seemed to shimmer in response, as though acknowledging that true kindness transcends sermon and scripture. Then, with a gentle touch, the newcomer lifted the man's bent arm, steadying it against the man's ribs. His other hand, calloused yet gentle, hovered near the man's shoulder before giving a slight, encouraging nudge. It was a gesture at once humble and profound, an unspoken promise of solidarity, of understanding more authentic than any rote recitation of dogma. Around them, the cathedral's lofty columns and polished floors took on a new resonance. No longer an impenetrable fortress of hierarchy, but a canvas upon which human compassion could be painted in broad, indiscriminate strokes. Some worshippers in the rear pews shifted uneasily, glancing from the unannounced scene to the ornate altar at the sanctuary's heart. Their own whispered prayers for absolution suddenly felt hollow in comparison. The soft glow of votive candles, once a reassuring beacon of divine intercession, seemed to sputter as they registered that the stranger's quiet mercy had eclipsed every liturgical promise. A few individuals, previously engrossed in hymn books or polite conversation, now found their breaths held and their hands unclasped. The leather-bound Bibles at their laps remained unopened, vestiges of faith insufficient to bridge the gap between ritual and reality. Even the priest, draped in his ceremonial vestments and clutching the heavy cross at his chest, hesitated in his downward step from the chancel. The solemn grooves of the cathedral's stone floor bore witness to his uncertainty as he stopped short, the once imposing emblem of his authority feeling suddenly brittle. There was no anger in his posture, only the quiet unraveling of a conviction that mercy must be measured by status. He watched as the stranger's presence reshaped the air itself, bending it toward genuine compassion rather than doctrinal decree. Beyond the marble threshold, daylight filtered through stained glass in muted pools of violet and gold, but those colors now felt muted against the living light of human care unfolding at the door. The homeless man's eyes, damp with unshed emotion, met the stranger's steady gaze, and in that silent exchange there was no room for shame. The waves of empathy radiated outward, touching every stone and echoing in the distant strains of a lone organ note. In that moment, the cathedral ceased to be a museum of faith and became a living testament to what it truly means to welcome the weary and the broken. As the newcomer gently withdrew, stepping back into the soft hush he had commanded, the ripples of his silent support continued to spread. Passers-by lingered a heartbeat longer before turning away, their minds quietly reshaped by the contrast between grand ritual and simple humanity. And high above, the vaulted ceiling seemed to cradle the memory of his kindness, a reminder that in a place where words often reign supreme, the language of compassion needs no translation. The priest remains rooted in place, his heavy cross clutched at chest level as though it were a shield against the world beyond the sanctuary doors. The flawless geometry of his vestments contrasts sharply with the tremor of uncertainty that begins to tremble in the lines of his face. His lips part slightly as if to speak, but no words come. The liturgy he has memorized offers no guidance for this moment of reckoning. Above him, the vaulted ceiling arches in serene indifference, and the muted rays of stained glass spill across the marble floor, illuminating the polished brass of the donation chalice. Yet the very altar that once conferred authority now casts back a reflection of his own hesitation. From the periphery of candlelight, the stranger moves again. His steps are unhurried, each footfall absorbed by the soft carpet runner that leads toward the ornate bowl intended for offerings. He carries nothing but a small slip of paper folded several times and a well-worn pencil tucked behind his ear. There is no fanfare, no declaration of intent, only the measured confidence of one whose heart is guided by conviction rather than creed. As he nears the altar, the hush deepens, the flicker of candles echoing the pause that settles over the congregation. The priest's gaze, fixed on the stranger's gesture, instinctively tightens around his cross as if seeking its old reassurance. Gently, with the same care one might show a fragile relic, the stranger unfolds the paper and lays it against the rim of the donation bowl. His fingers brush the cold stone rim for a moment before he steps back, leaving the note in plain sight. The pencil beside it catches the flame of a nearby candle in reflection, a slender beam of light that draws the eye. In that quiet tableau, the offering transcends gold coins and perfunctory blessings. It is an act neither scripted nor solicited, a humble plea scribed in graphite that insists upon being heard. The words on the paper, though simple, carry the weight of 1,000 silent prayers. Gratitude for the existence of this sacred space, coupled with an earnest request not to forget those left outside its walls. The handwriting is uneven, the letters slightly smudged where tears have fallen. Yet each stroke speaks with more clarity than any sermon ever delivered from a pulpit. In its brevity, the note bridges the gulf between ritual and reality, demanding that compassion be measured not by proximity to the altar, but by the tenderness extended to the most vulnerable. As eyes sweep across the congregation, each worshiper encounters their own reflection in this unspoken invitation. The fine suits and polished shoes that shuffled forward for communion now appear in stark contrast to the faded jacket and worn boots of the man who cannot kneel at the rail. The choir's delicate harmonies, once the pinnacle of divine expression, seem to pale beside this wordless testimony to shared humanity. For a moment, the faithful shift their weight, posture no longer rooted in tradition but swayed by conscience. The cavernous nave, built to amplify praise, absorbs a different resonance, that of introspection and the recognition that mercy cannot remain confined to ritual alone. High above, the chandelier's crystals catch the candlelight, scattering points of brilliance across the vaulted arches. They glimmer like distant stars, yet the brightest illumination now emanates from a single scrap of paper. In the hush that follows, the cathedral ceases to be a monument to doctrine and becomes a mirror to the soul. Every polished pew and carved pulpit bears witness to an unspoken question. What does it mean to live one's faith when the markers of worth lie hidden behind stained glass and sanctified walls? In this silence, an invitation unfolds, an urgent challenge that transcends the boundaries of cloth and creed. Who among those who step back will now step forward? Which hearts hardened by dogma will soften before the simple power of a pencil-written truth? The note rests unguarded at the altar's edge, a beacon calling forth the courage to act. And in that quiet plea lies the promise that true faith is revealed not in whispered prayers, but in the fearless embrace of compassion made real. The hush that settled over the cathedral in that instant was absolute, as though every candle flame and every polished marble pillar had paused to witness a single transformative moment. Glimpses of recognition flickered across faces in the congregation. A widow clutching a prayer book lowered her gaze in astonishment. A young mother, gripping her child's hand, stepped back as if disbelieving what she saw. Even a priest, whose stern features had held firm through every preceding embarrassment of mercy denied, now seemed momentarily unmoored. The stranger who had moved among them in simple jeans and a well-worn jacket was not merely an anonymous act of compassion come to life. He was Keanu Reeves, whose name carried the weight of global admiration, whose deeds of quiet philanthropy had already reshaped countless lives. No proclamation was needed. The shift came in a ripple. Light glinting from the celebrity's unassuming backpack, the subtle catch of a beacon on his wristwatch, the sudden hush that followed an unanticipated echo of worldly renown within the sacred space. His presence, once humble and unadorned, now took on a new dimension. Not a plea for attention, but a declaration of purpose. In that instant, the very architecture of the cathedral, the soaring arches, the carved statues of saints, the flickering tapestries of devotion, was infused with renewed meaning. The walls that had seemed so impenetrable now felt porous, alive with possibility. Cathedral officials, scrambling to reclaim composure, moved forward with deferential steps and bowed heads. Volunteers who had lingered at the back aisles straightened their vests and stepped into the candlelit aisles, ready to join the mission. The head of the Board of Trustees, a dignified matron in crisp formal wear, approached the altar with open arms, her expression a blend of relief and resolve. Where once she had presided over meetings of protocol and propriety, she now embraced the spontaneous outpouring of mercy as the very cornerstone of her faith community. From the choir loft to the chapel side alcoves, whispers circulated. The man who had drawn strength from his own vulnerability was the same who had quietly funded the cathedral's winter shelter, had sponsored mobile clinics for those living on the streets, and had underwritten educational programs for displaced youth. All along, his low-key generosity had been the cathedral's best-kept secret, a silent promise waiting for the moment when compassion would be called upon to outshine ceremony. On the polished stone floor, the homeless man, once shunted to the threshold, was gently guided toward the altar steps by a pair of volunteers bearing warm blankets and hot meals. A medical professional in a crisp volunteer badge knelt to offer a check of his vitals, while social workers exchanged hopeful glances about reconnecting him with housing and support services. The contrast between the public refusal of mercy and this sudden cascade of aid could not have been more stark. In the flickering candlelight, the cathedral transformed from a relic of exclusive piety into a living workshop of kindness. Outside, the stained glass windows pulsed softly with color as dusk settled over the city. Those who lingered on the steps, a small crowd of passers-by, street vendors, and curious onlookers, felt the cathedral's doors open wider than ever before. No longer were they thresholds of judgment. They became gateways of welcome. The statue of the patron saint at the entrance seemed to smile in stone, its weathered surface warmed by the glow of community rebirth. As the final echoes of that unexpected turn reverberated through vaulted ceilings, the true scope of the transformation became clear. Cathedral leaders pledged to formalize a permanent outreach program. Volunteers lined up to offer their time and talent. And those who once regarded faith as mere ritual saw it reborn as active witness. The homeless man, lifted from the shadows of exclusion, would carry forward the story of compassion received and then shared. And Keanu Reeves, whose unannounced presence had catalyzed the change, would slip quietly back into the city's life his example echoing in every hand extended, in every act of kindness that would follow. Thus the moment of revelation passed, but its impact endured. The cathedral's marble walls would forever bear the memory of that day, when fame and humility converged to shatter indifference, when a single act by an unexpected benefactor became the pulse of a living faith. In that aftermath, each heart carried a question that would linger long after the candles burned low. When mercy calls, will we stand aside, or will we step forward to answer? A few days later, the broad stone steps of the cathedral serve as the threshold to a new kind of gathering. Dawn's pale light finds a long, winding line of people that stretches from the carved wooden doors out into the square. Among them are men and women whose faces bear the lines of exhaustion and hope in equal measure, clutching blankets or folded garments, tattered identification cards, and the few coins that have carried them this far. Hunger and hardship show in the patience of their posture. Yet there is an undercurrent of anticipation that hums through the crowd like a shared secret. The air holds the scent of morning mist mixed with a lingering trace of incense, now joined by the aroma of simmering stews and freshly baked bread. At the center of the courtyard, beneath a canopy of white canvas and strings of soft lanterns, a long table is laden with steaming pots of soup, trays of crusty rolls, and platters of fruit. Medical tents stand to one side, their bright fabric billowing in the breeze, while volunteers in simple vests direct those in need towards social workers seated at folding tables covered with pamphlets and clipboards. In orchestrating this transformation of sacred space into a place of relief, Keanu Reeves moves with subtle authority. He helps carry bowls, adjusts the hem of a volunteer's jacket, and pauses to offer a steadying hand to someone whose legs tremble with cold or fatigue. Nearby, the priest who once barred the threshold now stands shoulder to shoulder with him, sleeves rolled up beneath his cassock and eyes softened by understanding. The line flows forward in measured pace, each person receiving a warm meal ladled with care and a cup of herbal tea that steams in the chill morning air. Medical professionals greet newcomers with gentle checks of blood pressure and bandages for chronic wounds, their tablets aglow with notes on where to find housing assistance and long-term support. Social workers offer compassion alongside signatures on forms, connecting individuals to shelters, counseling services, and job programs. Where once the cathedral's grandeur had set helpless souls apart, now the architecture frames their dignity as they share smiles, laughter, and the unspoken relief of being seen and served without judgment. Beyond the canopy, the surrounding streets pulse with renewed life. Vendors unhitch folding chairs to make way for impromptu storyteller sessions, where children with bright eyes hear fables of kindness and courage. The clatter of pots and cups mixes with the murmur of grateful voices and the soft patter of bare feet as little ones chase each other between shadows and sunlight. A makeshift chalkboard bears the words, "All are welcome," scrawled in bold strokes, its message underscored by the sight of suited professionals sharing benches with those in layered coats. In the freshly painted mural across from the cathedral steps, the image of outstretched hands merges with symbols of faith and hope, a visual testament to the day's collaboration. In this gentle festival of compassion, the priest lingers near the edge of the gathering, his features reflecting a complex tapestry of regret and resolution. He watches as Reeves lifts a young child onto a volunteer's lap, as a frail elder wraps a donated shawl around trembling shoulders, and as family members long separated by misfortune embrace in tearful reunion. The rigid lines of religious dogma that once shaped his every gesture now give way to the softer lines of empathy, drawn anew by the simple power of service. No longer does he clutch his cross as a barrier. Instead, his hands fold in quiet gratitude, acknowledging that true faith is measured in deeds that lift others from despair. As the sun climbs higher, the courtyard resonates with the hum of transformation. The steel bells of the cathedral, rung at the hour, no longer signal exclusion but celebration of shared humanity. Each malnourished body fortified by soup, Each wounded spirit, soothed by touch and conversation, becomes a living sermon for all who witness it. The power of mercy, unleashed through a single act of kindness that blossomed into a movement, now radiates outward, touching corners of a city long closed to hope. In this unfolding tableau, the lesson is unmistakable. Doctrine without compassion is an empty shell, but compassion infused with purpose becomes a force capable of renewing lives and rekindling faith. As the line dwindles and the last bowls are emptied, the cathedral stands not as an ivory citadel, but as a living sanctuary, its doors wide, its walls welcoming, and its people bound by the strength of mercy made manifest. In hands raised to serve rather than to judge, in hearts open to welcome rather than to exclude, the true spirit of the sacred finds its home.